of which lived across the border in Juarez. At that time, there was more fluidity to the border, and women were really able to freely cross to attend prenatal care visits and for their births. The vast majority of women were choosing to have their babies in the United States, not because of a desire for citizenship, but because the hospitals in the Juarez region had an extremely high rate of coarse sterilization, and women were afraid of having procedures done against their will. Um, I've continued to work with many undocumented people or mixed documented families as a nurse midwife for most of my career. Up until very recently, I worked at a healthcare center in the Detroit area that focused on sexual and reproductive health. And until 2016, I probably saw 3 to 5 Spanish speaking patients a day whose visits were pretty extensive because they often didn't come in for care until they had a large number of concerns. However, within 2 months of Trump being inaugurated as president, that stopped. And suddenly I went from 3 to 5 patients a day to seeing 1 to 2 Spanish speaking patients a month. They were afraid to come in for care or to even leave their homes when it wasn't absolutely necessary for fear of being deported back to countries that they had no connection with or felt fearful for their lives and the lives of the families if they returned. So for 22 years, I've worked with undocumented women and families and gotten to know them and their communities. Um, in my experience, they're a hardworking, honest, earnest, and deeply vulnerable population. And while immigration policies that center humanity, decency, and respect for the human spirit have been in pretty steady decline for the past 20 years, what's happened in the last 4 years is unprecedented. And I feel like it's going to take decades of change policy and a change culture to undo the damage and earned mistrust that's occurred. Thank you for letting me share my small window into this community.
Exhibit 18. Declaration of CGGP. I, CGGP, declare under penalty of perjury that the following is true and correct to the best of my knowledge and recollection. My date of birth is, I am 17 years old. I am from Honduras. I came with my daughter. She is 1 year old. I also came with my baby's father, and we have been separated. He is 21 years old. At the moment, my daughter and I are detained together at Ursula Station. We came to the United States 13 days ago on about May 29th, 2019. We all crossed the river together in a raft. We came up the riverbank and were met by Border Patrol, and they brought me, my daughter, and my baby's father to a place to be fingerprinted. We were there overnight. The next day, May 30th, 2019, my daughter and I were brought to Ursula in a bus. The trip took about 15 minutes. At the first facility, my daughter and I were put in a separate cell from my baby's father where we could see but not talk to each other. It was so crowded that some people had to sleep sitting up. We were not given a mat to sleep on and had to sleep on a concrete floor. The next morning, after we were given something to eat, they brought me and my daughter to Ursula. My baby's father stayed behind. At Ursula, we fell 3 times, At Ursula, we are fed 3 times each day at 7 a.m., noon, and the evening. We don't get anything to eat in between meals. We are sometimes given sandwiches that are cold and raw, and so we don't eat it. We get a water bottle at mealtime. If we run out of water, we are given cups to fill from a fountain, but the water tastes and smells like chlorine and is dirty, so we don't drink it. Here at Ursula, there is a table with diapers and wipes and feminine products, and we have to ask permission to get them. Once I needed clean clothes for my baby because she threw up, but when I asked for them, I was told they didn't have any available. She is still in the same dirty clothes. I have not asked for anything since then. The bathroom at Ursula has no paper towels to wash with or dry our hands. I've not been given a toothbrush or toothpaste to brush my teeth or my daughter's teeth. I have not been given a hairbrush to brush my long hair. We were allowed to shower together once, the day after we arrived, but I have not showered since. That was 12 days ago. I would like to be able to take a shower, me and my baby again, so that we could get clean. At Ursula, we are in a fenced cage with other teenage moms with kids. Sometimes at night, we are taken to a separate cage with only other 17-year-old moms with their kids. It is very crowded. We got a mat to sleep on here, but the guards will take the mats in the early morning. Sometimes we each get a mat, but other times we have to share a mat between 4 people. So then I have to sleep directly on the floor with my daughter in my arms. We have only one thin Mylar blanket to share, and the lights are always on. I last saw my baby's father about 8 days ago. I saw him in a nearby cage, and he told me that they were going to deport him. I'm very sad because I want our family to be together. On Mondays, they give us a phone call. I call my dad, who lives in Maryland. My daughter and I hope to live with him. I also have aunts and uncles living in the US. I have not been given any information about our legal rights as detainees. I have not been told how long we will be here. I, CGGP, swear under penalty.
Hello, Rebecca.
Hi.
Thank you for being here.
I want to thank everyone for spending this evening learning and listening to real stories about immigration happening here and now. And I just want to make sure that people understand that while the stories we're hearing about happen at the border, they don't start at the border and they don't end at the border. My name is Rebecca Epstein. I'm a volunteer co-leader with Bend the Arc, Jewish Action Greater Ann Arbor. A little about myself. Social justice has been part of my life as a child, as a teen, as a young adult. I chose my jobs and my friends often based around issues of social justice. But my focus was broad and hadn't really narrowed in focus. I hadn't narrowed my focus to become an immigration justice advocate until I saw a picture in 2016 of a toddler crying outside the wheel of an SUV, and there was a border patrol officer just looking on. I got reactivated at the moment I saw that photograph, and more focused in my activities. And me and a couple mom friends started a local group of Bend the Arc, which is a national organization that gives access to a professional community organizing coach to pockets of progressive Jews all over the nation. And one of the first actions I took was in 2018 when I traveled with about 60 progressive Jews from Washtenaw County with Rabbi Josh Winston from Temple Beth Emeth, a Reform synagogue in Ann Arbor, and other faith leaders and people of other faiths from all over the country to protest outside of a detention center for unaccompanied minors close to El Paso, where Lee was saying that's where she did her work. It wasn't in El Paso proper. It was in a very small rural town called Tornillo, Texas, and it sits astride the Mexico-Texas border. It's a very rural, impoverished area. It was hard to get to. I had a lot of experiences on that trip. We walked the bridge from El Paso to Juarez and saw what it was like for ourselves to have people come up against the guards who were trying to get them to turn around. We protested outside of the detention center. We saw kids being brought in on buses, and we saw all kinds of trucks and huge amounts of water being carted into this facility because there wasn't running water at the detention center. They had to bring in everything that they needed. And you've already heard a lot of really sad stories, but I want to talk to you about some of the joy and resiliency that I saw during my time at El Paso and later when I visited another facility in Florida, because it really reminds me of when this work gets hard, of why we do it. And also, I'm a huge Mr. Rogers fan. I grew up with Mr. Rogers, and one of his most famous sayings is, if you're in a bad situation, look for the helpers, right? And I was looking for the helpers when I was there. So one of the things that I did when I was in El Paso is I volunteered at a short-term shelter called Annunciation House. And I helped pick out clothes for people who had been released just hours earlier from an ICE detention center. And many people had been there for weeks and if not months. And by the way, one of the reasons why it's called ICE, why it's earned that name, is because their centers are freezing cold. However, getting back to the joy, I helped an adolescent boy and his mother pick out clean clothes. And this kid thought I was absolutely hilarious. Like, he couldn't believe the sounds coming out of my mouth were actually words. And so we just had a lot of giggles together as I found him shoes and socks. And while I was doing that, I got a close look at his mother's feet. And they looked very tired and bloody and blistered and worn out. And after seeing her feet, I was overcome, and I needed to go somewhere to pull myself together. So I went outside, and less than a minute had passed before I found myself engaged in a game of peekaboo with a toddler that was in the input line. And then we just kind of organically, organized a game of duck, duck, goose with children who had got permission to step out of the intake line. And we played duck, duck, goose in Spanish. And at the time, I knew almost no Spanish, but I will always remember pato, pato, ganzo, pato, pato, ganzo. And the just the relief of play during that moment. And when I walked back into the shelter to help another family, I met a man who had just arrived, and he really wanted to hold the door open for me, but I really wanted to hold open the door for him. And we went back and forth this ridiculous number of times trying to hold the door open for each other until we were just like laughing about it because it was absolutely ridiculous. And I eventually let him hold the door for me. Um, and I also saw a woman who I think was indigenous. And I say this based on her small stature and the fabric she was wrapped in. Her and I made eye contact, and her eyes were very sad, but they were also trusting. And she had a baby who was cozily sleeping in bright hand woven fabric, and it was snuggled between her shoulder blades. And this baby was the color of nutmeg, and it had the longest, thickest, most luxurious eyelashes I had ever seen on any human. And I mention what I perceive to be her identity very intentionally because a lot of people that are trying to cross the border are indigenous Central Americans from places like Honduras and Nicaragua, Guatemala, and they don't necessarily speak Spanish. So having people in border social services that speak languages like Mayan and Mosquito and some of the other indigenous languages is a need that I just want to point out. So when I was at Tornillo, Texas, we didn't see any of the kids because the only way you could see them was to either trespass on federal or private land, or as some performance artists did later that year during Christmas, they executed a mini circus on stilts so that they could see the kids and the kids could see them perform. However, we were told by Rabbi Josh Winston, who has maintained a relationship with a family whose son was inside Tornillo for months, that the kids could hear protesters outside and they could hear us singing. And there have been multiple reports by teachers in El Paso who have had kids in their classrooms that knowing that people were out there just meant a huge amount and helped give them a lot some strength. The next year, 2019, I protested and witnessed at another detention facility in Homestead, Florida, which is near Miami. And like Tornillo, it's a very economically depressed area, but since it's less rural, protesters and witnesses are able to be there much more often. And simply because of the makeup of the center, you are able to see the kids and have them see you regularly if you stand on a tall ladder across the street. And when the kids are outside, you can see them. And some of the people who had been witnessing for months had made these heart-shaped signs that they would hold while they were standing on top of the ladders. And if a child waved at them, they would wave back in exactly the same motion that the child waved at them. Or if a kid, I mean, the kids kind of got used to this. So they figured out, oh, if I take off my hat and I circle it around, the person on the outside and the ladder, on the ladder will do the same thing. Kids would start, like blowing kisses, and then the people on the ladders would catch them. So they knew that they were being seen and acknowledged by people outside. So while there's a lot of sadness and tragedy in Central America, leading them to cross the border and coming to places like Washtenaw County, I just really want to emphasize the humanity and resiliency that I experienced while I was protesting.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Exhibit 54. Declaration of KARL. I, KARL, declare under penalty of perjury that the following is true and correct to the best of my knowledge and recollection. I came from Santa Rosa Barberina, Guatemala. My birthday is, I am 14 years old. I left Guatemala with my 18-year-old sister, ACR, because the gangs wanted us to join them, but we did not want to. We knew that they sometimes rape or kidnap girls who do not do what they want. That is what they did to girls in our old neighborhood. So when they came to take us to make us join in our new neighborhood, we knew we had to leave, and so we left a week later. Our father, JARC, lives in Northern California, and so we came to the United States so we could live with him and be safe. His telephone number is... Our mother does not take care of us. She leaves for long periods of time and often yells at us. My sisters have raised me. We crossed a small tributary on Friday, and immediately an official met us and took us to an area with a tent about 10 minutes away. They lined us up and checked our skin and our hair. Then they checked our birth certificates and other paperwork. That is when they took my sister away from me, and now I am very worried about her. I don't know where she is or if she is okay. I'm worried they will send her back to Guatemala and something will happen to her there because she would not join the gang. Afterwards, they took us to a building and placed me in a small room. It was freezing. I slept on the ground. It was concrete. There were other people in the room. One was a grandma, and she said she had been there for 20 days. I am currently at Clint. I am in a room with about 50 children. There are 3 boys, ages 2, 8, and 10 years of age. Another boy came today. I think he's about 8 years of age. The rest of the children range from ages of about 4 to 17 years of age. There's one mother with a baby. There are 10 bunk beds and 1 single bed. If someone leaves a bed, you just have to grab it. The youngest children often have to sleep on the concrete floor. There are 2 large pads on the floor that sleep 2 or 3 children, and there are 2 pads that are very thin and sleep 2 children per pad. There are about 20 children who sleep on the concrete every night. There are young children with no parents. There was an 8-year-old with no parent here who was trying to take care of a little 4-year-old girl. She did not know how to take care of a little girl, so she kept asking me what to do, and I started telling her, but then just started taking care of her myself. I take her to the bathroom, give her my extra food if she's hungry, and tell people to leave her alone if they're bothering her. She has been sick the whole time, and I've been taking care of her and is coughing and has mucus. She doesn't talk hardly at all, just yes and no. She wears diapers, and I change them for her. Her bracelet says her name is KXM, but I don't know where they got that name. The roster says her birth date is, and her A number is. I'm also taking care of another little girl who arrived yesterday. She said that she came to the United States with her aunt and cousin, but was taken away from them by the guards. Like me, she's very sad and crying all the time. Right now, I'm holding both little girls in my lap to try to comfort them. I need comfort too. I'm bigger than they are, but I am a child too. I have not been able to talk to my father or my sister, and I want to speak with them. It is very upsetting to be separated from our families. I, KRL, swear under penalty of perjury that the above declaration is true and complete to the best of my abilities. This declaration was provided in Spanish, a language in which I am fluent, and was read back to me in Spanish.
Inez, hello. Thank you for being here with us.
Hi, everyone. While
Well, most agree that the situation it is a current crisis. The trauma experienced by immigrant youth is a crisis that will last for years, for generations, actually. A crisis that we have not begun to see the full extent of. We must fundamentally shift our policies to create a more humane acceptance of immigrants. My name is Ines Llorente, and I'm going to be talking about the current immigration policies. For those who don't know me, I am originally from Spain. My background is in political science and international relations. I have recently graduated with a Master's of Public Affairs from the Ford School of Public Policy. And I have been working on immigration issues for the past 6 years, supporting grassroots organizations. Since I arrived to Ann Arbor a couple of years ago, I've been volunteering with a number of immigrant rights groups in the area as well. So before I start, I'll say that in the interest of time, I won't be going through every single immigration policy, just those most relevant and impactful. And I'll start with Biden, because we've seen definitely a shift since he took office, and immigration of policies since then, since January, they can be basically divided into 3 categories. One, those that are rolling back Trump's hardline agenda. 2 would be those aimed at enacting new policies to make the immigration system more welcoming. And 3rd, those policies that remain unchanged. Some of the most relevant ones are the changes on immigration enforcement, for example. DHS issued a new enforcement guidelines with narrower priorities. And as a result, we've seen the ICE arrests have decreased by more than 60%. Detention of non-citizens have also decreased by more than 2/3 since the beginning of the year. Another relevant policy change has to do with the detention of families. Immigration in detention is the practice of incarcerating immigrants while they await a determination of their immigration status or potential deportation. And the system of over 200 jails across the country is run by ICE. And these centers are often criticized. In them, well, people are deprived of their liberty to start with, and they are denied access to lawyers. They are separated from their families, and often they are subject to medical neglect as well. The administration has stated that it intends to at least close to the 2 of the Texas facilities and turn them into processing centers where families will be held for fewer than 72 hours and then released. Though that transition has not been really completed yet. And as of March, ICE was releasing families from these facilities within 10 to 15 days, more or less. When it comes to humanitarian protection, there have been a couple of steps taken. One is to protect from deportation certain national groups. Some of these are the designation of Venezuelans and Burmese as eligible for temporary protective status, or TPS. And also to restart the Central American Minors program that allows Central American children who have a parent lawfully present in the United States to be granted refugee status or to be paroled into the country. And I'm sure that also this week, most of you have heard that President Biden has set a new annual refugee cap and is being raised from the previous 15,000 to 62,500 this year for the remainder of the year. And lastly, regarding immigration benefits, the current administration has reversed the public charge rule. This is huge, and it means basically that immigrant families should no longer be afraid to seek the services that they need, especially during the pandemic. And regarding the border, the arrival of the vulnerable populations to the southern border, especially children and families from Central America, has been a daunting challenge for now close to a decade. We've seen peaks in 2014 and 2019, but this year actually has seen the fastest rate of increase in arrivals of unaccompanied children on record. March, for example, saw the highest number of interceptions of unauthorized migrants at the border since March 2001. And these included the highest number of single adults since at least 2013, the third largest ever number of people traveling as families, and the highest ever numbers of unaccompanied children. What has the administration done so far? Well, we've seen that they've begun opening emergency influx shelters around the country. I think there are around 12 of them to get children out of CBP custody. And this seems to have helped reduce the population of unaccompanied children in Customs and Border Protection custody. However, there remains concerns regarding the ability of the Office of the Refugee Resettlement to release children to sponsors quickly enough to clear the growing backlog. Plus, these shelters do not have to go through the state licensing process that ensures that they are providing the appropriate care for children. Other key policies with an impact in the southern border are the exemption of unaccompanied children from the public health order known as Title 42, that allows authorities to immediately release arriving children or migrant without providing access to asylum. Children, as I was saying, are now allowed into the country to seek relief in immigration courts, just as they could do it before March 2020, so just before the pandemic hit. Biden has also put an end to the Mexico Protection Protocols, known as the Remain in Mexico program, that required around 70,000 asylum applicants to wait outside US territory while their cases were adjudicated. On February 19th, asylum seekers waiting in Mexico with an active US court case began to be admitted into the country to complete their court proceedings. That's going very slow though. And the administration has also resumed a focus on addressing root causes of migration in Central America. And the US Agency for International Development has now a team in the region to scale up humanitarian assistance. And what remains unchanged from the previous administration? Well, we continue to see a response to rapidly expel most southern border crossings under the Title 42. And in February and March, 65.6% of all people encountered at the border were expelled under the CDC order. While unaccompanied children and some families at the border have been allowed, as I was saying, they represent just 27.6% of total apprehensions over the period. And I'll say again, It's just 27.6, that exception. And refugees continue to be also put through extreme vetting measures. The president has ordered a review of these extreme vetting measures that are imposed on visa applicants and refugees, but most of them still remain in effect today. So this shows us that despite the change of tone and the initial efforts to make the US immigration system more welcoming, there is still a lot of work to do. Over the years, we've seen how deterrence-based policies have not really produced anything, but short-term declines in the number of people seeking asylum, while inflicting significant harm on families and children. The solution cannot be to turn people away and send them back to harm in their home countries. The solution should ensure the creation of a unified humanitarian approach for all groups, whether they are single adults, families, or children. That's why we are calling for some concrete actions that include to support relief organizations at the border, and also to join ACLU and Amnesty International letter campaigns to get DHS secretary to shut down the ICE detention centers. And we'll be explaining more and expanding this section more towards the end. I think I've run out of time, so I'll just leave it at that and let you listen to the next testimony. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Exhibit 46. Declaration of CVLG. I, CVLG, declare under penalty of perjury that the following is true and correct to the best of my knowledge and recollection. My date of birth is... I am from Guatemala, and I traveled with my aunt and cousin around, and we left Guatemala April 24th, 2019. We crossed the border around June 3rd, 2019, and were picked up by the Migra. They took us by car to a place. They asked if my aunt was my mother, and when I said no, they separated me from her and my cousin. I was taken to this place on June 4th, 2019, and I have been here for 15 days. I have spoken to my mother, who lives in Delaware, only once since I've been here, after being here for 10 days. I am sad because I miss my mother. I don't know why I'm still here. Before I spoke to my mother last Friday, I spoke to a woman who told me I was being moved that day or Monday, but I was not moved on Monday, and I am still here. I live in a room with 13 girls, 2 who have babies. About 5 days ago, SYC, who is 4 years old, arrived. The guards told another girl who was 17 years old to take care of S, but this girl left, and so I began to take care of S since she was all by herself. S is also from Guatemala and told me that she traveled to the United States with her father, who dropped her off with someone and went home. S was supposed to meet her mom, but she doesn't know where she lives or her phone number. When S arrived, she cried a lot. The guards asked me to bathe S the day before yesterday. This was her first bath since arriving 4 days before. I brushed S's teeth after every meal. This morning at around 6 a.m., a guard came into the room and read off a list of people's names. He told me all of the people whose names were on the list to come with him. S's name was on the list, but mine was not. It was early in the morning, so S and I were asleep side by side. S heard her name and clung to me, crying. I had to explain to her that they had called her name and that she had to go along without me. It was hard to have to tell her that. She did not want to go with a group of people that she does not know, and they did not tell her where she was going. S looked back at me as she joined the group that had been called. Tears were running down her face. I felt very sad, but did not want her to see me cry. Since I have been here, I have not been able to wash my clothes. At breakfast, I eat oatmeal and a pudding and juice. For lunch, I eat soup, a juice, and a cookie. At 3 p.m., we get to eat a cookie for a snack. For dinner, I eat a bean burrito, a pudding, and a juice. At 9 p.m., we get a cookie. But sometimes, I am still hungry. I, CVLG, swear under penalty of perjury that the above declaration is true and complete to the best of my abilities.
Thanks. So we had another one to show, and I think that we'll pause on that. I wanted to explain what we'd like to welcome you to into small groups in a couple minutes. And we're hoping that this is just the start of a conversation to help one another. Yeah, I'm not muted. Good. To help one another develop the skills to have difficult conversations. Um, over the last year, we've all been in situations where folks that have different views, where it's difficult to have conversations with folks with different views, and sometimes that, like I said before, can bring up a lot of autopilot responses and defensiveness and things that don't actually help us to move forward, things that don't actually help us to build communities with greater understanding. So we have a few folks that are going to facilitate the small groups, and just have, we have some prompts that we'd like you to work with one another to go through and think about how it is that we can develop our skills with one another, support one another, so that we can have deeper conversations with people that that we don't agree with. But before we do that, I'm going to ask Renee to come and help us with a meditation and some grounding. Thanks.
Wonderful. My name is Renee Rodemer, and I'm the director of the Interfaith Roundtable of Washtenaw County. I just want to check, is my sound okay? Because I heard my sound was a little bit low earlier. Okay, good. Just want to honor your presence tonight and honor the presence of people who are connected to this moment. Certainly the people behind the testimonies that we are hearing, all the communities you represent, all of the people who have shaped you into this moment, have shaped some of your best ability to hold space, to be empathetic people, to be people of solidarity. So I'd like to invite us tonight to ponder, what are the stories, images, larger forms of meaning that we bring to a conversation like this? Certainly to a topic like this, and yet it is much more than a topic. We are talking about communities and fellow human beings. And so what are some of those undergirding images, stories, larger forms of meaning? It may come from your spiritual background. It may come from organizing communities you're connected to. It might come from your family. It might come from a sacred text. So just want to invite you to bring all of that into the space. And just anytime we're gathered together, there are more people and more influences present than our visual that can be seen. And so tonight I was asked to give an example just by sharing one of the images and stories from my own background that shapes how I bring larger meaning into a conversation like this. And so I'd like to read a short story from the Gospel according to Mark. This is a really important story that I think I bring to this conversation, or that has been formed in me by just hearing it over the years. Um, and so in my faith tradition, my Christian faith tradition, there is this story of Jesus being present to a leper. And a leper was a person who had a variety of skin diseases and was absolutely pushed to the outside of the community in very tangible ways. I'm going to read this story. It's really short. A leper came to him, begging him, and kneeling, he said to him, "If you choose, you can make me clean." Moved with pity, Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him and said, "I do choose. Be made clean." Immediately the leprosy left him and he was made clean. After sternly warning him, he sent him away at once, saying to him, "See that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded as a testimony to them." But he went out and began to proclaim it freely, to spread the word, so that Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed out in the country, and people came to him from every quarter. The reason I bring up this story, one of the first things I want to say is that immigrants and migrants are not lepers. They are our fellow human beings. And yet there are times in which, via stigma, via discrimination, dehumanization, we often push immigrants, migrants, fellow human beings to the margins. The reason I bring up this story as a story that's been formative for me, and that I want to bring into the conversation, is the ways that Jesus models solidarity here. One of the things that's interesting about this story is that in the ancient Greek text, no one is named. It's all he, him, the leper, Jesus, and it blends so much together in the original text that sometimes it's hard to tell who is who. And what I think is interesting is that this person, this human being who came to Jesus and asked to be restored to the community, was a person that Jesus, under the cultural standards of that time, was not supposed to touch. And yet he did. And then not only that, he stepped so deeply into the experience of what this person had experienced that it's as if they exchanged places. This person goes out and tells everyone what he experienced. And because everyone finds out about it, there's that last piece where it says, because of this, Jesus could no longer go into a town openly. There's an exchange here. One of the things I need to say and that I'm mindful of is that as a white, cis, privileged woman living in Washtenaw County, someone with citizenship, I will probably never know what it is like to be a migrant. I cannot fully enter that with my own set of experiences, but I think we are all invited to bring empathy into these conversations, to bring compassion into these conversations, and to let it transform us, but to come so close that there are no margins, or as Father Gregory Boyle says, someone I really admire, is that we go out to the margins so that there are no more margins. We go and we create a community that is expansive enough to hold all of us. So again, I come to those initial questions. That's just one of my experiences from my faith tradition. But I wonder, what are the images, the stories, the larger meaning that you make that come from your background, your spiritual background, the background of your family, the background of your chosen family, the background of your life experience, the ways that we are invited again and again, in new, deeper ways, to come closer to each other and to recognize we are all human together. So how will we practice solidarity and empathy and ultimately move into action. That is what we are called into tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. I've broken up folks into different rooms, and we have some small group facilitators that will guide us through the next conversations, and then we'll come back in about 20 minutes or so. Thanks. And if you're not familiar with this, you should have an invitation on your screen that says go to a certain room. You just click on that and it'll bring you there.